Hi, I'm your host, Alyssa Grenfell. Before the episode begins, we have a few notes for listeners. This podcast is hosted by me and veteran attorney Tim Kosnoff, but you'll also hear other voices from our production team introducing topics and guests.
Our team produced this podcast with the mission to educate people on the issue of child abuse in the LDS community, help victims of abuse, and encourage us all to work together to help fix this issue.
We occasionally use excerpts of speeches by leaders of The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, publicly available on their website. These excerpts are used under fair use for the purposes of commentary and public interest.
If you're listening and anything you hear feels close to home, please know it should not have happened to you. You are not alone. There are people who believe you, and we can help. Episode transcripts, resources, and our contact form are available on our website, architectureofabuse.com.
This podcast contains discussions of child sexual abuse. Please listen with care.
I'm your host, Alyssa Grenfell, and this is Architecture of Abuse. Episode 3, The Culture.
Is there just an impossible tension that exists between the teachings and what is required to protect children in the church, in your view?
Oh, I don't think there's a tension at all. I think protecting children is a core part of the gospel.
I recently was reading back over my childhood journals, and there's not a single entry where the church is not 90% of the entry. So, there wasn't really a part of my life that didn't feel touched by the church in some way.
So it's a pyramid structure with the prophet at the top, and the hierarchy goes down, and the goal of the organization is to keep the organization going.
And so whenever you have genders that are hierarchically ranked, with men ranking above women, there's going to be problems with power and therefore with abuse.
You have such an early indoctrination to trusting the system with your money, with your secrets, with your guilt. And then if you go to a bishop and, maybe you don't even have the words for sexual assault, but you're trying to get some help from your religious leader, and he says, well, it was your fault. Of course you believe him.
Because there are so many things that we, in the church, are considered sins that are really trauma responses.
It gives me more empathy for the bishop, because I've actually heard this. I was abused in scouting, but I got over it.
I think there is probably some denial that this isn't really a problem, right? It's not a big problem. And from my perspective, if it's one person, it's a huge problem.
The father's First Amendment right to believe what he wants to believe versus what's best for the child. And the Massachusetts Supreme Court said what's best for the child is more important than the father's rights.
And so when your choices are either to choose happiness or great unhappiness, that's such a false dichotomy, because if the only right option is yes, then it's not a choice.
Hi, this is Lindsay Hanson-Park, executive producer of the podcast. It may be difficult for outsiders to understand the degree to which LDS Church teachings shape every facet of a member's life. From the songs you sing as a child, to your daily schedule, to decisions that shape your adulthood, like how to structure your home and family life, where you should go to school, even the clothes you should and shouldn't wear, and whom you should marry. The church dictates life. If official policies and practices are the bones of the LDS Church, the culture among the membership serves as the muscle that reinforces them. But what happens when a religious culture that is supposed to provide spiritual and physical safety becomes the very mechanism that causes its members harm?
For this episode, my co-host Tim Kosnoff and I discovered how the LDS Church can create an environment where women and children are marginalized. We're talking today with Dr. Julie Hanks. Thank you so much for joining us, and if you could just give a brief introduction about what you do.
Yeah, I'm a therapist, and I've practiced in Utah for over 30 years now. So I've worked a lot with LDS clientele. I'm also a practice owner of Wasatch Family Therapy and a content creator and an author.
Since recording our interview with Dr. Hanks, she's made the difficult decision to step away from active participation in the LDS Church. We'll be releasing a special update where she and Tim reflect on this personal shift, the reasons behind it, and her continued love for the LDS community, a love that shines through in the conversation you're about to hear.
As a member of the church and a lifelong member and so forth, is there just an impossible tension that exists between the teachings and the structure of the church and what is required to protect children in the church, in your view?
Oh, I don't think there's a tension at all. I think protecting children is a core part of the gospel. So I think it's when the bureaucracy and the legal stuff kind of come in. Protecting children from abuse is very aligned with the church teachings.
Let me be perfectly clear. Any kind of abuse of women, children, or anyone is an abomination to the Lord. Those who perpetrate these hideous acts are not only accountable to the laws of man, but will also face the wrath of Almighty God.
Yeah, so the church was developed in a patriarchal society, right? By definition, a patriarchy is men are in charge. And it seems like the church has not evolved as quickly as the broader society has in terms of equality. So, well, this could be a whole podcast, but polygamy, like from the beginning, men and women were unequal, and that continues today. So the church still teaches that, like men preside in the home. And so whenever you have genders that are hierarchically ranked, with men ranking above women, there's going to be problems with power and therefore with abuse.
When you consider this hierarchy of the top-down approach to the leadership and the culture of the church, what else would you say could change to make the church to be a place that's more healing?
Well, a big place to start would be equality of men and women and valuing women's voices as equally as men's voices are valued. And since we're talking about abuse, I think the Relief Society presidency would be a great resource to get training on, recognizing and referring people who have been abused. So using the female resources that the church has, I think would be a great place to start.
Do you think the patriarchy and the way the system is kind of set up for men to be over women and children is why the repentance of a man is potentially prioritized over the safety of a child?
Oh, yeah. I think men are privileged in most situations, including that situation, right? We want to rehabilitate him because he's our friend and we golf with him or we work with him, or right? It's like there's this familiarity. It's like he's more like me than the child is. And that's just kind of human nature. But when you have only one gender in positions of power, that happens.
Do you think too, how the church allows men can be sealed to multiple women, but women can only be sealed to one man. Right. Often in the church, I also had a sense that children similarly so were almost interchangeable when we're weighing the scales of who gets to matter the most, and why I think maybe these cases of child sexual assault are taken maybe not as seriously as the man's repentance. I feel like I'm still making sense of this organizational hierarchy personally. And I feel like as we've been discussing this topic, I've been getting a sense for, in the same way that I felt kind of like an interchangeable piece to the eternal family, that children almost do function similarly so to the patriarch being the center of a home.
Yeah, I can see that. I'm reminded of growing up. I'm from a family of 9, and one of my brothers had a best friend, and he was an only child. And I remember thinking, like, he's more valuable to his parents than I am. I remember kind of thinking that, and not that that's true. My parents would have been devastated, right? Like, I get that. Anyway, I think when you have a lot of children, there's a tendency to kind of not value each one individually as much. Like, I was treated more like a herd than like an individual. I don't know if that goes along with what you're saying.
No, yeah. It's almost hard to put words to, maybe because it feels like at the fringe, or like something that spins off the doctrine and is like an unintended result, which is that children matter less. But it doesn't feel like then if you take that back into the doctrine that does feel internally consistent.
Right. That was not what people would preach, right? Like children are so valuable and right. But then they're not always treated that way in cases of abuse.
The idea is authority.
That's the voice of Dr. Stephen Hassan, a mental health professional and expert on undue influence. His perspective on the culture of the LDS Church and how it plays a role in abuse is valuable, not just because of his academic knowledge, but also because of his personal experience. As a member of the Unification Church, informally called the Moonies, a South Korean-born religious group founded by Sun Myung Moon, who claimed that Jesus Christ had contacted him on Easter Sunday in 1936. Moon taught that he was called to unify all religions and governments through, among other things, mass marriages, to restore Christ's kingdom of heaven on earth. Stephen left the Moonies in 1976 and has dedicated his life to helping others find freedom of mind ever since.
I feel like the issue of freedom of mind, telling people it's your mind and only you should control it, and we need to understand social psychology and neuroscience and etc. is my work. This is my life work. So a lot of folks who are born inside of an authoritarian group then grow up and have children and raise them in the authoritarian group. When you're not in a healthy religious organization that encourages proper developmental stages with the goal of empowering your child to be a thinking adult capable of making decisions for themselves. But when you're on the other side of the influence continuum, which I talk about under the BITE model, the behavior, information, thought, and emotional control of authoritarian groups like the LDS organization, the Mormons, the idea is authority.
Priesthood authority.
Priesthood power and authority.
Priesthood authority and priesthood power.
So it's a pyramid structure with the prophet at the top, and the hierarchy goes down, and the goal of the organization is to keep the organization going. And that means power, money, control of BITE, including sexuality.
I think we need to back up and just say, I'm not convinced that confession of sexual sins, in quotes, is healthy. I think it can be helpful for some people, but to require it, I don't know that that's healthy. And then I think it's very unhealthy to have someone in a position of power talking about sexual things with a minor child. That's just a setup for abuse, And I do not think, most bishops or stake presidents are abusers. But what that does is it sets up a power dynamic and a situation behind closed doors that leaves a child vulnerable. And we should never be allowing kids to be in a vulnerable position.
We've talked on the podcast about the kind of isolation that happens between men and women, boys and girls, kids from parents. Can you speak to how that might impact this topic specifically with child sexual assault? How might this isolation in programs within the church impact or exacerbate the problem?
This may not be where you're wanting to go, but just the separation of men and women, boys and girls, has a sexual undertone, right? Like when boys and girls become sexual in their early teens is when they become separated. 11 and 12, it's like then we separate the boys and the girls and the men and the women. And so just the separation is kind of an interesting strategy. I think that having lay leadership is a problem because there's not training, there's not background checks. I mean, that's just common in our society. And I think that we could do a lot more to protect children by requiring background checks with people who are working with children and youth.
I was a teacher for a long time, and I always had to do every single place I ever worked, I was doing a background check, I was doing fingerprinting.
Yeah.
Why do you think that, based off the history of having issues surrounding this topic, why do you think the church hasn't moved forward yet with a system like that? And I don't know if you could speak to that because that's obviously their decision.
Yeah, and I can guess. I think there is probably some denial at every single level, from a family to a ward to the leadership, that this isn't really a problem, right? It's not a big problem. And from my perspective, if it's one person, it's a huge problem. And so I think denial. And then there is this trust that's automatically transferred, like, oh, you're a member of our community, so we can trust you. And I think that comes into play, like, oh, well, we trust all these people. They believe the same things. They have the same values. They go to the temple. And so there's kind of this borrowed trust that doesn't have to be earned. And I think that can put people in situations that they don't deserve to be in, and access to vulnerable populations.
So part of the features of an authoritarian group is this belief that we are superior, we are chosen, we're going to go have our own planets, or whatever the belief system is. And therefore, the secular world, the outside world, is evil. It's dark, it's even dangerous.
Secularism is beginning to be the norm, and many of its beliefs and practices are in direct conflict with those instituted by the Lord himself for the benefit of his children.
So this all or nothing, black and white, us versus them mentality is inculcated in children inside of authoritarian groups, where your parental conscience that wants to protect your child is overridden by the indoctrination that has been trained to be obedient, to report everything, to follow the rules, etc.
I recently was reading back over my childhood journals, and there's not a single entry where the church is not 90% of the entry. So it felt like it was kind of everything and everything all the time. Like there wasn't really a part of my life that didn't feel touched by the church in some way. There are so many instances I can look at throughout my experience in the church. If I ever wanted to choose something that didn't feel perfectly in line with the church, I would cast that to the side.
We teach that agency is the ability and privilege God gives us to choose and to act for ourselves and not to be acted upon. Our agency is essential to the plan of salvation. With it, we are free to choose liberty and eternal life through the great mediator of all men, or to choose captivity and death according to the captivity and power of the devil.
And so when your choices are either to choose happiness or great unhappiness, that's such a false dichotomy, because if you can't say yes or no, if the only right option is yes, then it's not a choice. Then it's not consent. You're either choosing happiness, like basically freedom, or captivity is what they're saying. There's only one choice to make, which is to become a member of the church, to get baptized, to pay 10% of your tithing to the church, to follow all of their many, many rules, to get married in the temple, to serve a calling. And there's such a long list of, if you say yes to eternal salvation, that means all of these other things you have to say yes to. And if you don't choose all of these other things in their entirety, you're choosing captivity. There's really no proper choice other than the choice they give you.
So I guess my first impulse is to ask you if you knew that when I was lecturing for the Moonies, we would use the argument that you can't feed a baby steak. It would choke. You have to feed it formula. You have to dumb it down so that people won't reject you. Only that is a false assumption that you're not talking to children, you're talking to adults that you're recruiting, and you're not giving them informed consent.
We all have our agency. We can choose to let God prevail in our lives or not. We can choose to let God be the most powerful influence in our lives or not. Are you willing to let God be the most important influence in your life? Will you allow his voice to take priority over any other? Are you willing to let whatever he needs you to do take precedence over every other ambition? Are you willing to have your will swallowed up in his? Consider how such willingness could bless you.
And when you are indoctrinated since you're a child to continue to confront these questions of choose myself or choose the church, choose my family or choose the church, and you so thoroughly every single time toss everything else out, and it's always the church, that when you do encounter a truly bad situation, you're so accustomed to making that choice that you just make the indoctrinated choice.
You asked me, why don't parents turn the predators that harm their children over to the police? Why are they following the rules and, turning them over to the bishop or whoever? And it's because they've been indoctrinated to do that.
There are so many things that we, like in the church, are considered sins that are really trauma responses. And bishops don't know that. They're not trained in trauma-informed care. And so having a consultant for each stake, a therapist that wouldn't do the therapy, because I don't think the church should be employing therapists necessarily, but that can refer out to all of the best providers in the community and help bishops and stake presidents and Relief Society presidents know, okay, this is a trauma response. It's kind of amazing that I have never been contacted for consultation by any of my bishops or stake presidents or Relief Society presidents, right? I could be a resource, but they're not thinking trauma-informed, right?
The idea is ethical, healthy groups. You're free to question, you're free to leave without fear or coercion. And then the pseudo-identity, extreme stuff, a pyramid-structured authoritarian group that uses deception and recruitment and controls behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions to create an identity that's dependent and obedient. I was actually part of a custody dispute in Massachusetts. And basically a couple fell in love, married. The mom was Jewish, the husband was Christian. They agreed to raise their children Jewish. And then they had a kid, and then the father got recruited into a Bible cult called the Boston Church of Christ and started telling the kid that mommy's going to hell and, you have to come to the church meetings. And it went all the way to the Massachusetts Supreme Court. And the argument was the father's First Amendment right to believe what he wants to believe versus what's best for the child. And the Massachusetts Supreme Court said what's best for the child is more important than the father's rights. So I was very proud to be part of that dispute. But a lot of people don't understand that laws are made through decisions, either precedent-setting changes or through, litigation. And in the case of mind control, we need to develop a bigger scientific community that says, yeah, social psychology is a science. You can measure authoritarianism and undue influence by factors like lack of informed consent, lack of respect for conscience, telling people they can't talk to critics and ex-members. So the BITE model has now had a quantitative study, and it's been challenged and verified. We can actually measure statistically how authoritarian a group is to explain this is not a healthy religion, because healthy religion is people are supposed to follow through faith, not through coercion.
Eric Phillips, executive producer here. Nowhere is authoritarianism more present in the LDS Church than in the culture of its full-time proselytizing missions. Even the choice to go, to dedicate 2 years or 18 months away from society at large, is heavily influenced by pressure from family, church leaders, and peers. On the church's website, churchofjesuschrist.org, it reads, quote, "The church's missionary program is one of its most recognized characteristics. Latter-day Saint missionaries can be seen on the streets of hundreds of major cities all around the world," end quote. It lists that there are over 74,000 proselytizing missionaries, as well as 31,000 senior-age service missionaries currently serving the church full-time worldwide. Even though the church's robust missionary program exists to convert new members, it is openly taught to members and missionaries alike that the first objective of a 2-year mission is ensuring the lifetime conversion of the missionary who goes.
I served a mission in Denver, Colorado. Here's an example of what it says in the Missionary Handbook, which is a rule book for missionaries. I read 3 pages of this a day and had it memorized by the end of my mission. On my mission, I was taught to view this as personal scripture because it was so significant in my life. And I learned on my mission that obedience brings blessings and exact obedience brings miracles. So this was something that on my mission, I was striving to be exactly obedient to. In the section about personal responsibilities, it says, talk with your mission president about worthiness issues. Talk with either of your mission leaders about immediate safety concerns, including assault or abuse, or other issues that cannot be resolved with other missionaries. So to be clear, first of all, it doesn't even say that you should tell the police if you've been assaulted. It also puts assault and abuse immediately after discussing worthiness issues with your mission president. Putting that word worthiness, which is all about choices and being righteous and being good, next to abuse, is obviously completely backwards, because when you're abused, it's violence perpetrated on you and you should call the police. It shouldn't be resolved by someone who's never received any actual proper training about how to deal with abuse victims.
So I have 2 sons who served missions. My husband served a mission, and I've had lots of clients who've served missions. And the variety of experiences is just as broad as people. A couple of thoughts. So young adulthood is a common onset for mental illness. When you put a young adult in a very stressful situation, it can be a trigger for mental illness. And so there are some concerns that I have, particularly in reducing the age of missionaries. Missions can be great. They can also be very traumatic. And I think we're seeing more and more missionaries return early for mental health problems. And so that's a concern. I told my own children, this is your choice. No, I love you. It doesn't matter to me if you go or not. There's so much pressure that people are going that shouldn't be going for a variety of reasons. I think it'd be a lot healthier for the church to back off and let it really be this is something I want to do, not that I need to do for the social acceptance.
I repeat what prophets have long taught, that every worthy, able young man should prepare to serve a mission. Missionary service is a priesthood duty, an obligation the Lord expects of us who've been given so very much. Young men, I admonish you to prepare for service as a missionary. Keep yourselves clean and pure and worthy to represent the Lord.
Once they are then on those missions, is there anything else as a therapist and a member and as a mother that you would say you would be an advocate, to change or to, something that you would implement to improve the situation for all missionaries everywhere?
I think calling home and doing video calls once a week was a much needed change. I think that's so much better for the missionary, decrease isolation, stay in touch with your primary support network. I mean, that was a really positive change. And my understanding is that a lot of missions have therapists. And so I think the church is improving in recognizing mental health challenges in missionaries. That said, I think there's a lot of trauma that goes on missions. One of my sons went to a third world country, and he told me when he got back some of the things he saw, and it was traumatic. I think as a church, we underestimate the trauma that missionaries go through, just the scary situations. Yeah, I think we underestimate that. And I would love to see every missionary be evaluated when they come home for mental health, warning signs.
Yeah, I think that would be even, periodically while they're out there, just to get a gut check, because I had a lot of experiences with companions and myself just kind of floundering in severe, despair or feeling trapped. And I think it's really fair to say, if we're going to have people go on missions, because we know they'll continue to go, there are ways to implement things to protect them that don't involve just not going or even being less righteous or valiant.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, it seems to me, too, that what you have here is children and other people who've experienced trauma going to an individual who has served a mission, and if the doctor's correct that the stress of these missions produces traumatized individuals who come home and rise through the ranks and are meant to console and deal with trauma victims when they themselves are untreated trauma victims, dealing with their own trauma. It may not be sexual abuse, or it may be sexual abuse, and then added stress and trauma related to the mission that they served. And this is who you put in the chair on the other side of the desk. It gives me, I think, more empathy for the bishop and the individuals who have unresolved trauma that they have been discouraged from dealing with, yet they're in a position to be sensitive to other people's trauma. And I've actually heard this, like, well, I was abused in scouting, but I got over it, so what's the big deal, to tend to minimize other people's trauma because you believe that you have dealt with yours when you probably haven't.
We often talk about how the bishops don't have training, and that's why we're disappointed with the church, because the bishops don't have training. And I think when you take it from that perspective, by a mission, through the temple ceremony, through their upbringing in a high demand religion, it's like maybe a normal guy who's a plumber would call the cops. It's like we are talking about someone who's 15 rungs down the ladder in just the ability to approach a high stress emergency situation in a logical way.
It's not even that the parts are broken. It's that developmentally they never got the parts to begin with.
Yeah.
We need to know what's healthy developmentally, and to understand that just because someone is an authority figure and they say that they have a closer relationship to the divine than you do, doesn't make it so. You can have a direct relationship with the divine, in my experience and in my opinion, and the highest teaching is love. The highest teaching is don't do to others what you don't want done to you. The golden rule. And we need to go back to those basics. And when people say, Steve, you're trying to destroy the Mormon religion, I'm like, no, I want it to reform. I want the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Watchtowers to reform. I'm not into destroying anything. However, if there's an authoritarian structure in place, that needs to be disbanded where there's healthy checks and balances, because there are some people who are going to want to abuse other people, whether it's for power, money, or sex. I really believe that if people are given the information and they can test the validity of the information, they're not going to want to be exploited. They're not going to want to sit passively back with their family and friends being taken advantage of.
One of the biggest problems that I see is there's not a feedback mechanism for the members to give feedback to the leaders. And I think that the information comes from the top down and not very often from the bottom up. And I think that creates problems, and also in situations of abuse that creates problems, because I think members on the ground know what's happening where leaders who are making policies may not know what's happening, boots on the ground. I was going to clarify that the members do not have access to give feedback to the leaders, not that the leaders are completely unaware of what's happening. It's just, as a member, I can't, I have no voice, right? But that doesn't mean that they're not aware through other, like you were saying, legal and risk management.
Many people that are in touch with me want to try to reform the LDS Church from within, and then there are many people outside. In my experience, looking for 5 decades point of view, is that authoritarian groups change faster when there's outside criticism, when there's law enforcement, when there's big media. They're going to change policies faster than individuals verbalizing things.
It's a combination of multiple people and forces coming together. You've got survivors coming forward, hiring lawyers, lawyers filing lawsuit, then reporters who can report on the allegations in those lawsuits, which are then read in the newspaper or online. And other people see that and say, I know that individual, he did that to me. Then they start coming together, and this is what would happen. This is what happened after Boston. Almost overnight, I went from having 2 or 3 Catholic Church cases to having 300. It's just a snowball effect. And then in response to that and more news reporting, there's pressure on politicians, because then you get advocacy groups who are introducing bills in the legislature, and all of this takes time, but it's like they're gears, and they all have to be kind of working sort of in the same way. And in this town, that's not so easy. It really takes an army to change this. So it will happen. Will it happen in my lifetime? I hope to see some movement in that direction. But unfortunately, in Utah, the movement has been backwards, not forwards, because the church has seen what happened to the Catholic Church, and it doesn't want that to happen to it. And so it's locked the vice down even tighter than it existed before.
Perhaps as the church grows in strength and we members grow in faith and obedience, Satan increases the strength of his opposition, so we will continue to have opposition in all things. Some of this opposition even comes from church members. Some who use personal reasoning or wisdom to resist prophetic direction give themselves a label borrowed from elected bodies, the loyal opposition. However appropriate for a democracy, there's no warrant for this concept in the government of God's kingdom, where questions are honored, but opposition is not.
And I think it ties back to what we discussed. You know, when you grow up and you're at 3 years old singing songs about how you love to pay a tithing, and then you have such an early indoctrination to trusting the system with your money, with your secrets, with your guilt. And then if you go to a bishop and you say, hey, this thing happened to me and it made me feel really bad. Maybe you don't even have the words for sexual assault, but you're trying to get some help from your religious leader. And he says, well, it was your fault. Of course you believe him.
So you see a connection between the obligation to pay tithing and how abuse victims talking to their bishop, how those two things are linked?
I think it's just the same conversation about what indoctrination does to the human brain.
Right.
Where you're consistently told that the organization has more information about you than yourself, and that you should outsource everything you possess. That's a line from the temple. Everything you possess is for the LDS Church. So when you believe your money really belongs to them, your possessions really belong to them, then when you approach them with a problem and they say, here's the solution, there's not a muscle you've ever practiced as a Mormon to say, that's not true. I had a crime against me.
There are few members of the church who at one time or another have not wrestled with serious or sensitive questions. One of the purposes of the church is to nurture and cultivate the seed of faith, even in the sometimes sandy soil of doubt and uncertainty. Therefore, please, my dear brothers and sisters, my dear friends, first, doubt your doubts before you doubt your faith.
It's like there's a muscle that you've practiced so thoroughly that it really subverts even your most basic human instinct to understand yourself.
I mean, that's fascinating. I've never heard it explained that way. That's very helpful in understanding that, because that's that's something that I've always kind of struggled with is why do people surrender their God-given right of personal autonomy to this entity? Is it because it starts so early and it's so constant and so uniform, like a drumbeat, that by a certain age, it just isn't going to go back, or it's going to be a real struggle?
Your identity is your beliefs. If a bishop ever told me anything about myself, even if I didn't think it was true, I would quickly believe the bishop before I would believe anything that I had originated of my own mind. And so I think that why so many survivors, I think, also feel so much guilt is that they've been indoctrinated to believe that the accountability was their own and that it's their sin too, and that they contributed it to their own assault.
I mean, I've had cases where my client had been subject to church discipline as a child for homosexual activity because he got preyed upon by, a male-fixated child pedophile. I mean, I don't know how to even begin to wrap my head around that kind of thinking, except I think it comes out of that Miracle of Forgiveness book, which, is as I say, it's treated like it's doctrine.
If you're not familiar with the classic steps to repentance, such as confession and abandonment of sin, restitution, obedience, and seeking forgiveness, talk to a bishop or study a source such as President Spencer W. Kimball's masterly work, The Miracle of Forgiveness. In addition to fulfilling those requirements, the return of your peace of conscience will be hastened by careful attention to another step that is sometimes not recognized. The Savior has made it clear that to receive forgiveness, you must forgive others their offenses against you.
So when a child is abused, in general, when anything goes wrong in a child's life, they tend to blame themselves because they don't really have any power in their lives. And so kids will say, well, it must be me, because that gives them a sense of control. It must be my fault. And so if I'm just really good, if I do the right things, so it gives kids a sense of false control. Kids blame themselves. And then when you grow up with that, something's wrong with me, I need to prove my worthiness, there's shame that can lead into either self-destructive behaviors or perfectionism and kind of that direction of like overcompensating for the flaws or the shame that the child feels.
There's also, I have many memories of the conversations around personal accountability, the age of 8, when you turn 8, you're accountable. And I think also the role of the accountability taken on by baptismal covenants and, I'm sure for getting the priesthood, now you have this added mantle of responsibility. I think it does impact how people perceive the power that they do have or the role they might have within their own abuse. So
yeah, that is a good point.
The next thing I want to say is that as a mental health professional, there's a book called the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. It's published by the American Psychiatric Association, and it's a list basically of all mental conditions that are reimbursable by insurance. So there's literally a dissociative category for brainwashing. It's number 300.15. If there's any clinicians listening, they probably don't know about this one. But why I'm bringing it up is that a dissociative disorder takes you out of your body. And healthy functioning, our mind-body needs to be aligned. We want to listen to our body. We want to listen to our gut feelings. And now we know there are neurons in our gut, not just up here, but in our gut. We want to pay attention because feelings direct us. We don't want to be controlled by our feelings. We need to use our critical thinking, our frontal cortex to analyze data. But we want to listen to our feelings. And the thing about growing up developmentally, back to the healthy side, when we grow up to adulthood, we should achieve a level where we have self-knowledge. I know who I am, I know what I believe, I know what my values are, but we have a capacity to to hold other worldviews without losing our own. And in the healthy side, this enriches us. If we identify in a particular faith, it enriches our sense of self. It doesn't diminish it. But when you don't have that maturity, you're functioning at a very low developmental level where it's kind of us versus them.
Yeah, I was thinking of the difference between how the church talks about pornography versus something like child sexual abuse, and how there actually is a large willingness to talk about pornography and talk about its evils and talk about, whether it's, even at conference, they'll still use words like pornography during conference. And I think the difference between the approaches is that pornography can be this kind of evil thing that comes into your house through your computer that's kind of insidious, and that is from the outside, like an outside force, versus child sexual abuse is an inside force.
That's a really good point. I've never thought of it that way. It's an outside versus inside, right? We have to acknowledge, like, there's some rot inside versus like the world is so dangerous. The world out there is there's so much sin, right? It's like, no, there's so much sin here in us.
Yeah. My next question was, part of the journey of victims is to find healing from trauma through therapy. As someone who helps with that journey, do you encounter stigma from people seeking therapy?
Right. So I see the people who, if they do feel that stigma, feel like it's more important to get therapy, because I see the ones that actually make it into the office, right? So, but are there thousands and thousands of other people who need it, who do feel that stigma? And particularly men asking for help is like culturally not okay. And so we see a lot more women than men who come in for therapy, because I think just the broader social norm of it's okay for women to ask for help, but it's less okay for men. I do think the church has made progress in diminishing stigma. There have been a few conference talks that talk about mental health issues, that talk about seeking professional counseling. And so I think when you hear it from the top, people are like, oh, okay, if Jeffrey R. Holland was depressed, then like I can acknowledge that I'm depressed and I can get help.
Yeah, I for a while saw a therapist while I was at BYU, and I felt like, that process of going to speak to someone, just even to arrive at the doorstep, is a huge lift, because it's so easy to kind of push it away, push it down, versus going and speaking face to face with another human being. And for anyone who listens to the podcast, I hope that they know that there's tremendous help to be had at the hand of a therapist, with the guidance of a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to kind of reach through to the audience and just share your message to anyone who's struggling with the stigma of going to a therapist, what message would you share with them?
I would share that I am a therapist because I went to therapy as a teenager, and I've gone on and off throughout my life. And my life is so much better because my parents said, do you want to go to therapy? And I said yes. And that changed the trajectory of my life in positive ways. And I think everybody could use therapy at different points in life. In fact, I just had a therapy session today with my therapist, and it was very helpful. And so I tried to talk openly about the fact that I go to therapy, because I think that helps reduce the stigma. I think the biggest barrier is just acknowledging that this is a serious problem. It's like, if you don't acknowledge it's a problem, it's like, oh, well, that just happens here and there. But which is hard. We have the stats. We have the stats to prove it. And so breaking through that denial and recognizing child sexual abuse, sexual assault is a huge problem in LDS communities. What are we going to do about it? So breaking through that denial, and it would require us to see ourselves differently. Like we are just as vulnerable as other, if not more vulnerable than other groups. We'd have to see ourselves differently, and people don't want to do that, So I think that's a barrier. I think that, the financial aspect is definitely not a barrier, but it would need to be prioritized, right? The church could hire a consultant for every stake in the world easily if that was seen as a priority. And so I think the biggest barrier is mental, of going like, oh, this really is a problem and we can do something about it.
Having handled these cases against the LDS Church, I always look for opportunities to learn new things. And you've taught me some new things today, and I appreciate it.
Oh.
What you've said, I agree with entirely, and it's based upon my experience dealing with sex abuse survivors and therapists in other contexts and in other organizations. But within this organization, what you've just said is somewhat subversive to the church, or that it would be perceived that way.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you have ever received caution.
Yes.
That maybe you are stepping outside what is approved.
Yeah, 2 Sundays ago.
Well, you deserve an award for courage for standing up for your clients and your survivors.
That means a lot to me, especially this week. So thank you. I'm
just impressed and thankful that there are people like you that are willing to take the stand and to speak the truth.
Thank you. I'm willing to talk about hard things, and you're not allowed to do that in the church. You have to leave the church to talk about hard things. But for now, I'm still in, and I'm like, we got to talk about hard things, people, because we could do so much better.
We want to thank Stephen and Julie for lending their expertise to this podcast, and we hope our discussion on LDS church culture was illuminating. Dr. Hanks alluded to the origins and history of the church as foundational to the culturally problematic attitudes present today. For our next episode, we will be shifting from culture to history with Lindsay Hansen Park to look at the church's founders, its history, and its practices, and why they matter in solving these problems in LDS communities.
This is like the most important untold story or undertold story in American history.
How self-gratifying to tell a victim, the way you deal with this is to be silent. And that's the only virtuous way to accept this abuse.
From Joseph Smith until now, you can draw a straight line to practices, procedures, and principles that we now call sacred, but that are still kept secret.
If you'd like to discuss a potential claim, you can contact me via my website, Kosnoff.com. If you are not a survivor but still want to do something to help our community, you can make an impact. Here are some things you can do to help. If someone shares their experience with you, the most important thing you can do is listen with empathy and guide them toward professional resources for support. Support them, but let them decide what is best for them. Contact your local legislators and emphasize your support for removing the clergy penitent privilege in child sexual abuse situations. Churches need to report child abuse to those with the knowledge, training, and authority to deal with these crimes. It is the only way of breaking the chain of abuse. Urge your local legislators to support a look-back window law to give child abuse victims additional time to pursue justice and publicly identify their abusers. Cutting off child sexual abuse survivors' access to the courts at age 21 is unrealistic and wrong-headed because most survivors have not processed the trauma by that age sufficient to take that step. Thank you for listening.
This episode of Architecture of Abuse was hosted by Alyssa Grenfell and Tim Kosnoff. Executive producers are Lindsay Hansen Park and Eric W. Phillips. Produced, edited, and mixed by Lizzie Bean. Research and fact-checking by Emily Sellers. Music by Ian Post, licensed through Artlist. Special thanks to Julie Hanks and Stephen Hassan for joining us. Show notes, transcripts, and additional resources are available at architectureofabuse.com. You can follow us on all platforms at Architecture of Abuse. If this episode resonated with you, please consider leaving a review and sharing it with someone who might benefit from the conversation.
Via email, we asked the LDS Church for comment, and although we didn't get a response, we did inform them we would include their standard policy, that abuse of any kind is not tolerated in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.